Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Transformation. Today we will be exploring collective intelligence and how to turn it from a buzzword into more of an operating system. Today's guest, Rod Collins, believes that a rapidly changing world is not unmanageable, but needs to be managed differently to sustain competitive advantage. So hold that thought. Rod, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Susie.
It's great to have you. Rod, you're the former head of Blue Cross Blue Shield Federal Employees Program and also the author of the book Nobody is Smarter Than Everybody. A book that details not only your management learnings, but also the details of your observations and experiments on the future of business transformation and the move that is, for me, every organization's challenge today, which is that move from individual to collective.
Yes.
We'll explore why top-down leadership skills kill innovation, why collective intelligence is better, what it looks like in practice. How can we shift from power over to power with, and what a new playbook for leaders may look like? So, if I come back to the once upon a time when business was simpler, one boss, one plan, one brain. Today, the world moves faster than any CEO can think. So, Rod, can you take us back to the moment when this idea first hit you? When did you realize that no single leader, no matter how brilliant, could keep up with this pace of change?
I was presented with a circumstance in my career. I spent over 30 years with the Blue Cross Blue Shield Federal Employee Program.
Mm.
And the middle part of my career with them, I was the general auditor,
Mm.
which I realize is really quite a cushy job because you make recommendations for everybody else. But one day, my boss came in and said, "We're shifting your role. We want to put you over the operations. It needs to be turned around." We were doing okay.
Mm.
But we were essentially treading water, and they wanted us to be higher performers. And the thought that occurred to me, I said, well, we lead this organization like it's a hierarchy,
Mm.
but it's really a network. It's an independent alliance of actually 39 separate companies. And we had a central office in Washington, D.C. And our management model was the typical one. It's the
Mm.
one that most people only know, and that's the top-down hierarchical model.
Mm.
And I think the reason we were just treading water is that these organizations were arguing with us, "You're not the boss of me." And so we spent a lot of time arguing over who's in charge. And
Mm.
so the thought occurred to me, this is a network, and we need to lead a network very differently.
Mm.
But there really was nothing out there. And so
Mm.
we kind of learned some things by trial and error. And very early on, I had created this meeting format. I realized if we were going to be a network, we needed to meet differently.
Mm.
And what we had done, and I think this is typical of most organizations, you tend to either meet by level or by
Yes.
department.
Yeah.
You meet by the horizontal or the vertical, but you never meet within the complexity of the organization.
Mm.
So I thought, well, and also I thought it was important that these 39 organizations have their fingerprints over whatever we did.
Mm.
And so I recollected, the best meetings that we've had, and I think a lot of people will relate to this, is when we bring in outside facilitators and have like culture building meetings. And,
Yeah, of
and
course.
those are usually very energetic. And for
Mm.
about 2 weeks, things are really terrific. And then we go back to normal. And I thought, well, what if instead of bringing in outside facilitators, leaders instead of being bosses are facilitators?
Mm.
And so we were focused on a particular big problem that we had that we needed to solve. And I thought, well, let's get 50 people into a hotel room because these organizations were all over the continental United States.
Mm.
And we'll get a microcosm of the business in the room. We'll have senior leaders. We'll have people we hired out of college 2 weeks ago. They'll all have the same voice.
Mm.
We'll set up some meeting dynamics where we're going to make it difficult to debate because I think debate is the lowest form of conversation. And
Mhm.
very few people ever change their minds in debates. And oftentimes we come up with least common denominator solutions. Well, what if we designed a meeting format where we came up with the optimal solution, the best we could come up with?
Mm.
So
How
that was
did
a picture
how
we
did
had
they
in
react
mind.
to that, Rod? Sorry. How did they react to you getting all different levels of an organization in a room and asking different questions?
Well, we were large enough that we could get 50 people who would go along with this.
Mm,
And and getting people to come to 2-day meetings is probably was even more of a challenge. All right.
mm, yeah.
But we got that first one together, and we set up some fundamental rules.
Hmm.
One is we said that our basic orientation was to implement the Covey principle, the Stephen Covey principle:
Mm,
seek first to understand, then to be understood. And just as a commentary on today's world, that
yeah.
particular habit has been thrown out the window.
Yeah.
No, very
Yeah.
few
Yeah.
people are listening to understand today. But anyway,
No.
we also established a dynamic I call clarifying questions,
Hmm.
which meant that as ideas were presented, people couldn't jump up and say, well, I have a better idea, or I
Yeah.
don't agree with that.
Mm,
We wanted them to say, all you can do is ask clarifying questions. That's implementing seek first to understand.
mm,
And we designed this basically, we went through a mantra of we would have an opening presentation, um, and we would usually ask people to restrict it to about 20 minutes to get us off the ground.
hmm.
There would be a period of 10 minutes for clarifying questions to get people used to the discipline. And then we would put people in small group discussions, and we would mix the people up
Mm,
because people sit with people they know. So as soon
mm.
as they did that, we'd count them off. And so maybe we count off by fives, and you go to whatever your number is, you go to that table. And so what we wanted to drive, and this is extremely important if you're going to tap into collective intelligence, is diversity of opinion.
Totally.
And there was no censorship in these meetings. And in inviting the 50 people in, we invited people who had thinking we didn't agree with. We invited people whose thinking we thought was off target.
Mm.
All we wanted is that the people would participate and agree to the process
But it,
and not be disruptive.
it's counterintuitive though, isn't it? Because confirmation bias means that if we want to do things quickly, we'll go and get people who think like us.
And it turns out the opposite is true.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so we were very mindful. And the reason we did this is if we're going to get these 39 organizations who agree, we can't have naysayers who
Mm,
would say, well, you didn't involve me. And so, again, so we had all these people in the room. And then we would ask them at the table, what are the 3 to 4 most important things we need to do to address the problem? And then each table would report out. It would be clarifying questions only. Again, no agreement, no
mm,
disagreement.
mm,
Just understand what the table is presenting, regardless of agreement or disagreement.
mm,
And so these first couple of exercises would take about maybe 2/3 of the morning. Then we would take their ideas, we would throw their flip charts on a wall, and we would ask people to discuss items that look like they were the same. And the group always made the decision. I, as the leader, never made the decision. Are they the same? If they are, which item do we keep? Which item do we discard? We would circle the item we keep, we'd cross out the one to discard.
mm.
If it turned out they really are two different items, we would edit the language so that it would be clear. But again, the group did the editing, not the leader. The leader might suggest, but the group decides. And this is very important. So maybe a list of maybe 30, 40 items would be reduced down to about
Mm.
16. And then we would give people 4 dots, say vote them any way you want. And invariably, there's a top 4 items.
Mm.
And we would, and by the way, this process of getting this list down from 30 to 16 sometimes took an hour and a half. But we had a better conversation because what happens in debates, we're talking about two ideas that are very, very different.
Mm.
And I'm not listening to you
No,
because I think I already know the answer.
I'm
I'm
right.
focused on getting you to come to me. You're focused on getting me to come to you. You never really listen to me. I never really listen to you. Well,
Mm.
when you ask the question, how are these two items? Are they the same or different? You have to understand both items to make that distinction, which means we're getting everybody to visit with every thought,
Yeah.
especially the ones where they're coming up in different groups. These are probably the more important items.
Mm.
So
But
anyway,
you're also pulling people away from polarized extremes, aren't you? So that means that you don't get two camps, so to speak.
exactly.
Mm,
Now, and when we look at the top four items, invariably one item would be important to one faction,
mm,
another item would be important to another faction,
mm.
and items three and four were the glue that made the whole set work. So these apparently first two items that appeared to be contradictory are seen in the context of the total four. And here's what amazed me. I used this format over 10 years. I never did one of these where
Mm,
I didn't have unanimous agreement among the 50 people. That was a surprise.
mm.
And so I began to think, what was going on here? And how did this happen? How is it that within 2 days, we got unanimous consensus that had literally evaded us for 2 decades?
Yeah. Wow.
And, and so as I reflected
Mm,
on it, I realized what the process was doing is it was getting us to uncover what we didn't know we knew, but more important, what we didn't know before
yes.
we began the project.
Unknown
That
unknowns.
doesn't get
Yeah.
identified in debate.
Mm,
Most organizations, especially top down hierarchies, are very good at two aspects of knowledge. They know what they know,
mm,
and that's their expertise. And they're very
mm,
good at it, no question about it. Okay.
mm.
And as long as that's relevant to the market, that's great. But some companies ran into trouble. Blockbuster knew everything you needed to know about how to sell DVDs,
Mm,
but that knowledge became completely irrelevant when streaming came in.
mm.
Organizations are also good at what they know they don't know, which is when they hire consultants.
Yeah.
But that's essentially the space they work in. What they're not good at is at uncovering what we didn't know we
We
knew
didn't know.
and what we don't know that we don't know.
Mm,
And that is important in a rapidly changing world. Our listeners think, do you have an idea where we're going to be in 5 years? Do you know what AI is going to look like? Do you
no.
have a sense of what new technology is going to happen? Do you think the world's going to be the same 5 years from now as it is now?
I think that's
When
the
I
only
started my
certainty. It won't
when
be.
I started my career in the 70s, I knew with a high degree of certainty the world 5 years from now was going to look the same
Yeah.
as it did in the early 70s. And that
Yeah.
was true. That's not true anymore.
No.
And so you could survive in that slow changing world, being
Mm,
good at what you know, and being good at what you don't know, and hiring consultants.
mm.
The excellent companies today are good in all four spaces, and networks are better at that. Now, why is that so? What happened in these collective intelligence workshops? And by inviting all of these voices, all these levels, okay, as we were discussing how we might implement something, for example,
Mm.
somebody might jump up and say, "You can't do that." And a lot of people in the room would be looking like, why?
Yeah.
I mean, how does this even affect you?
Mm.
And then the person would explain, and it's like, oh, we didn't know that. And
Mm.
so we're uncovering what we didn't know. Also, in the course of considering how we might implement an idea, somebody might jump up and say, oh, we have the ability to do that. Really? And then they would describe, and it's like, oh, we didn't know that we had that capability.
Mm.
And so these are things that drive efficiency and effectiveness. Now, um, when I left the organization, and I had done these over the course of 10 years, and after 5 years, it worked so well that I was promoted to be the program's chief executive. And
Mm-hmm.
it really gave me a broad space in which to apply this. And that led to the single largest 5 year growth period in the history of the business. And it had everything to do with mining and leveraging collective intelligence. Everything we did was on time, under budget, high
Mm.
quality.
Mm.
We put in a new system using these methodologies, and new
Mm.
systems in the healthcare industry in the United
Yeah.
States are very complex.
Yeah.
We didn't have a single customer facing error
Mm.
because we were very good at discovering what we didn't know in real time. And we used other techniques, which I won't go into, which were mining the collective intelligence of the various organizations.
Mm.
Something that was interesting, you mentioned at the start of our conversation today, it must have been hard getting people to come to these meetings. And I
Yeah.
said for the first couple it was.
Mm.
But I knew these meetings were making a difference when I began to get calls from people who said, why wasn't I invited to
Invited.
this 2-day meeting?
Mm,
Okay.
mm,
And the word got out there. And what it was, people don't dislike meetings per se. They dislike meetings that don't accomplish anything.
mm.
But if you have a meeting format that's going to accomplish big
Yeah.
things, people will participate and want to be in that.
Mm,
And the two most common comments I would hear at the end of these sessions is, I can't believe how much we did in so short a period of time. And the other comment I heard a lot is, what we came up with today, no one of us could have ever put together. And so collective intelligence is the most important intelligent asset an organization has.
mm,
It's
mm.
there, it's already paid for.
Yeah.
It doesn't require much of an investment. It
Yeah.
does, if you're a distributed organization geographically, you do incur the costs
Mm,
of of the hotel space and the airfare and the travel cost to bring people in. And you need to make sure you're not penny wise and pound foolish.
mm,
I set aside a budget of $500,000 every year to
mm.
pay for the transportation costs for people to come. So when I invited these people from the organizations, because we were reimbursing the costs, of course they're
Mm.
going to come. I
Yeah.
didn't want cost to be an inhibitor. That $500,000 per year, okay? So over 10 years, that's $5 million. Over those 10 years, we went from a $6 billion enterprise to a $19 billion enterprise. It was a very wise investment.
Mm,
And a lot of that was driven by growth. And so why is it collective intelligence so important? Why is nobody smarter than everybody? And it
yeah.
is because we do tap into these two knowledge areas of what we don't know we know and what we don't know that we don't know, and get that identified early in processes
Mm,
rather than the 11th hour when they typically show up, which causes the cost overruns and the delays
yeah.
and the reduction in
Mm.
quality.
I mean,
So let me just close out this thinking. James Sorowicki wrote a book called The Wisdom of Crowds, which I read after I left Blue Cross Blue Shield.
mm,
And part of when I left, I wanted to write a book, which became my first book, which was to understand, why did this work? Because a lot of what we did is, well, we know what doesn't work, let's do something different. And we know facilitators have great meetings, so why don't we bring some of that in? And
mm,
we just kept doing different things. Try this rather than that. But I wanted to understand why. When I read Sorowicki's book, I understood. To tap into collective intelligence, you need 4 attributes. Number 1, you have to have diversity of opinion.
mm,
And I cannot emphasize this enough. There can be no censorship.
mm.
Censorship is the pathway to dumb, plain and simple. Why no censorship? Because you want to unearth biases.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
collective intelligence is an effective way to eliminate biases and to bring the strengths out of different thinking into higher level intelligence. You need independent thinking. And what the role as a facilitator in these workshops is, everybody's thinking mattered.
Of
No
course.
matter what
Mm,
you had to say, it had to be a safe space. If and when we did get into times where we invited agreements and disagreements, and
mm,
we did get around to that at some point,
mm,
they tended to be much more effective because we've had this listening process I described earlier
mm,
first.
mm,
You need local knowledge. This idea of getting a microcosm of the business in the room and having people close to the processes in the same meetings with senior leaders gave the senior leaders better information because they were talking directly to the people doing the work. And as the senior leaders would put it forth an idea, why don't we do this? The people doing the work could react and say, well, this will work better than that, or you
mm,
can't do this because of that, but we can do this. And this was an effective dialogue
mm,
that pleased both the strategic leaders as well as the operational people. And why do people love the meetings? Their voices were heard in a way that made a difference. And the senior leaders were smarter because their strategies were going to be fully executed, which
mm,
would be very well, will look very well for them come compensation time.
mm,
And the fourth thing is, an aggregation mechanism. And I realized we had all of these in our collective intelligence workshops. Our aggregation mechanism, it was those dots
Mm,
that
mm,
that were able to cull out what were generally the four best ideas.
mm.
And so it's an incredible process, but it requires an entirely different leadership.
Yeah.
Give up being a boss, learn to be a facilitator, learn to encourage listening,
Mm,
learn to encourage understanding. And it's a couple of things will happen. You're more likely to grow. You're more likely to adapt and avoid the pitfalls of companies like Blockbuster.
mm,
And you are more likely to be at the front of innovation, but
mm,
doing it in such a way that it is more likely to succeed. Everything may not, it doesn't mean everything's going to succeed. Some things, when you're in innovation space, some things aren't going to work, but you're
mm.
going to find them out fast enough to pivot. Pivot's a very important part of innovation so that you remain ahead of the game.
And I love the four conditions for collective intelligence because, as we know, it can be a little bit nebulous sometimes, but it doesn't just happen. It's not an accident. And I'm a big believer in intentional design. So, designing for inclusion, designing for workplaces where people can thrive, and therefore also designing for collective intelligence. And what you've given us, Rod, is the architecture.
Yeah,
I think behind this idea and approach of collective intelligence, which also busts myths within organizations like the myth of the smart boss,
yeah,
the smartest person in the room is the boss and they will make the decisions, but also how to actually create conditions for sustainable growth.
yeah.
Which one do you see companies messing up first? And how can they fix it fast? If I take the four conditions of diversity, independence, local knowledge, and aggregation.
It's really a set.
Mm,
And I think that's the thing I learned. I think companies have aspects of this. I think there are companies that do listen to their employees. They
mm,
do invite dialogue, but they don't necessarily have the people close to the processes and the senior executives in the same meaningful conversation. And so
mm,
there's a bit of an editing process that can go on.
mm,
And you can't emphasize enough the aggregation mechanism. You've got to have some way in which you are pulling this together. And uh, and so uh, certainly the foundation is we've got to represent we've got to accept divergent thinking.
mm,
And I think, I mean, I've been around the block a few times, and this is the worst decade in my
mm.
life as far as diversity of opinion.
Yep.
I have never seen censorship at a level that we have today, especially in the West. And
Mm,
I think it's affecting both Europe and I think it's affecting North America in particular.
mm,
And Europe and North America are really the drivers of the industrial age. They are the drivers of the wealth conditions
mm,
that have existed in capitalistic democracies. And I continue to feel, I think the evidence is clear, capitalistic democracies have resulted in the highest levels of living for the largest numbers of people.
mm,
And behind that, right at the core of capitalism, is the idea of free markets.
mm.
And companies need to be free markets of ideas.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that the executives have to give up the final decisions. In the situation I was in Blue Cross Blue Shield, the board continued to make the final decisions. But I was bringing into the board, and the rest of the staff were bringing in ideas that we had funneled through this process. And the board's reaction was, and I think for senior leaders who might be nervous about this, let me share these two things as a
Mm,
senior leader. When I would go in with whatever we came up with out of this process, the board's reaction is, wow, this is really very well thought out.
mm,
And I was getting the credit for it, even though I was telling them, we got this from getting your people together. They
mm,
still saw me as the person in front of the room. Okay. And so they're delighted with it. and the senior leadership is looking good. We're achieving results. People are happy because their voices are heard. And
Mm,
that's the most important thing. While I would begin these 2 day sessions saying, we're not making any decisions today. The board, some other, the board will do that,
mm,
or the senior, but we're going to process ideas and we're going to do them in a way that we're going to hear what's important to you. That really matters to people.
mm,
Why
mm,
is it that 2/3 of employees are disengaged? That seems to be a replicable number that we hear year in and year out. Well, when you look at the typical corporation, about 2/3 of the people don't have supervisory responsibilities, 1/3 do.
mm,
Do you think there's a correlation there?
mm.
Well, because those 2/3 feel their voices don't matter. They're
Yeah,
told to shut up, get
yeah.
on board. They see things are going to fail, but nobody will hear them.
Mm,
So when they're engaged in a process at the beginning of the work, where their voices are blended in a meaningful way, where we have a really powerful conversation involving senior leaders and people close to the processes, you are really in an excellent position to
mm,
respond to the market in its rapidly changing conditions. So,
mm, mm.
yeah, it requires the whole set.
It does. And can you tell us a little bit, because as you talk about that, Rod, I'm thinking of, power with as opposed to power over. So the power of working in a networked way. But,
Yeah,
your example about the board formatting of it's still your idea. How do you
yeah.
strike the balance, Rod? And what's your experience there between creating this momentum for change where everybody's voice is heard in this different way of working, and then often plugging it back into a system at the top of the organization that doesn't necessarily think like that or really understand that?
That's a good question. When we first began doing these, I was scared to death because in the first one we did, the leap of thinking
Mm,
that came out of the group, it was like, oh my goodness,
mm,
we've got to communicate this to people across these 39 organizations. And if you weren't in the room, how are you going to make this thinking leap?
mm,
And so I remember we had we called them town hall conference calls. So we'd have
mm-hmm,
open lines where people could call in, and we probably prepared a couple of hours for addressing what would come up. We were convinced what the group came up with was the right way to go.
mm,
And we were stunned in the first one of these calls because it was so short.
mm,
And the reaction of the people was, oh, this sounds great. That's very well thought out. And I remember reflecting afterwards, why did this happen? How did they make this leap? And I realized because they saw their voice in the solution.
mm,
And because we did invite all kinds of points of view in the room, even ones we thought were wrong,
mm,
okay, there are two things we learned from that. Number one, we may leave the meeting and say, I think that person is wrong about
mm,
90% of what they think. But there was a 10% kernel in there that got reflected in the solution that accomplished two things. It got us a better solution because a blind spot got uncovered. And the person who appeared to be, shall we say, a miscreant, wound up being a contributor, and they're leaving the meeting feeling good, and people feel good about them.
mm,
And so we were driving this dynamic. And that's why we had unanimous agreement in the rooms, and why it translated to the board, and why it translated to the people when we would have these,
mm,
what we call town hall calls.
mm,
And so people object to things because my point of view wasn't heard. I know my point of view matters.
mm,
And I know at some point in time, you're going to discover that.
mm,
And then it's going to result in a lot of work for me
mm.
that's going to be unnecessary. And at the end of that work, we'll accomplish pardon my I was going to say pardon my French,
You could
but
say that.
it's half-assed.
Mm,
And so why don't we produce something that is the best that we can do?
Mm,
And so there were a lot of surprises in that.
mm,
And this became how we approached all the major projects.
mm,
I mentioned I had done these 10 years, 5 years leading the operations, 5 years leading the business.
mm,
And I recall we were probably into this process about 7 years. And we were getting one of these sessions together. And the 50 people are in the room. There's buzzing, there's just energy. I lean against the wall and I say, in 1 minute, we're going to begin a meeting to address the most difficult business problem we're facing. I haven't a clue where we're going to be 48 hours from now, and I'm dying to find out. But the one thing I'm sure of, whatever it is, it will be the best we could do. And then I thought to myself, Rod, how many chief executives begin an important session with that
yeah,
mindset?
yeah. And what was the reaction of the people in the room, Rod? Because not many people, not many CEOs do that, clearly.
Oh, I know this was thinking to myself. I didn't
Mm.
say this out loud. I'm thinking
Ah,
that.
okay.
And I realized how much my own sense of leadership had shifted.
Mm,
Leadership is not about my imposing my will.
no.
It's not about being the smartest person in the room. It's about bringing together the smartest intelligence that this organization has. It's the collective intelligence of its own people
Mm,
and doing what I can to facilitate constructive conversations where everybody is heard, where diversity is welcomed. I
mm,
mean, this diversity was extremely serious. There would be times where we appeared to have the unanimous consensus.
mm,
And I would ask the room this, is there anybody sitting here who's thinking to yourself, this is fatal. It's going
mm,
to fail. And I would say to them, if you don't think it's the best we could do, but it's going to work, then go with it. But if you're sitting there and you think this is a disaster, this is going to fail, and even if you're just one voice, and I made an obligation, I said, you have an obligation to speak up because you may see something the rest of us don't.
mm,
And I'm again, make it very safe for
mm,
that lone voice to come forward. What generally happened is the person would stand up, and I'd say 9 out of 10 times, they would express their concern, and the people would say, oh, no, we're not doing that. We're doing this. And the
mm,
person would go, okay, I got it. Everybody's on board. But every
mm,
once in a while, somebody would say something, and the rest of the room would go, oh, wow,
mm,
we didn't know what we didn't know.
mm,
And then we would go on an entirely different path
mm, mm,
and get the solution that all of us could agree to. And I tell you, the impact on the people was dramatic
I
because
can
they would
believe it.
sit there and realize we were there. We had a
Mm,
solution. We could have gone on. They really, it really does matter
mm,
uh, that what you think. You really are free to express
mm,
your opinion.
mm,
And look at where we got to. And so people began to relish diversity of ideas because as we went through this process, they could see this leads us to higher
mm,
thinking than any one of us could accomplish. It's an
mm,
entirely different leadership task.
mm. And which brings me to what does it look like, Rod, when the stakes are high, the pressure's on? Because we all know as human beings that when we're under pressure, we're stressed, we're tired, we revert to what we know. So, you know, how does the collective intelligence approach work when it has to be done immediately and everybody's under pressure? You know, what's the line between freedom and chaos, I suppose, is my question.
Okay, and my principle for that, a mantra is the higher the pressure, slow down to move fast.
Mm,
Take the 2 days to slow down. And out of that, we got speed
mm,
because the rework that has to get done after taking that time is dramatically reduced
mm.
because in those 2 days, we are uncovering what we didn't know, and we are uncovering, and this is really important, what we didn't know, we knew.
Yes,
I
yes.
mean, you already got that,
Yeah,
okay?
yeah, yeah.
So, and you've developed something that everybody is on board with. So there's no resistance.
Mm.
And so that gets you so you're feeling the pressure for those first couple of days, but this gets the pressure released.
Mm.
And
Mm.
so but that's I want to convey something else, because if any traditional leader out there decides to do this, you're going to run into this situation,
Mm.
and it's going to be the moment of truth for you as a leader. And it happened to me. I was facilitating one of these collective intelligence sessions, and I was convinced the group is on the wrong path, that what they want to do is terrible. Now, I've accepted the discipline. I was the only person in the room who never rendered my point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Because as the leader,
Yep.
if I said what I thought, half the group's going to say, well, that's what we're going to do anyway. You might as well just go along. And
Mm.
so I never expressed my opinion ever for a single second in the 10 years I did this. So I'm there thinking this group is on the wrong path. And there was an urge. I'm supposed to be the boss. I need to interject into this. I have a responsibility to do
Mm.
this. And I'm thinking, and if I do this, it will not take more than an hour or two before it gets conveyed all over the United States. Rod Collins believes in diversity of opinion as long as you agree with him.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I can't do this. I have to trust the process. I have to sit on this feeling. It was one of the hardest
Hardest.
moments for
Yeah.
me. And I'm glad I did it, because
Mm.
what happened was the group was on a journey.
Mm.
They didn't land at that spot. It was merely a stepping stone to a different place that they couldn't have got to had they not visited this stepping stone. And I was delighted, as they were, with the solution that came.
Mm.
And so in future meetings, whenever I had that feeling, oh my goodness, they're really messing this up. This is the wrong place to be. I would think, oh, we must be on the pathway to a really brilliant solution. I can't wait to see what it is. And I was never disappointed.
I mean, and thank you for sharing that, because I think it's so hard to do, to step over one's own fear. And, one fear that I hear a lot from leaders around collective intelligence is if everyone decides, no one's accountable. What's your view on that, Rod, in terms of how, so if everyone decides, accountability doesn't disappear, does it? So how do you manage that? And do you have metrics that can keep accountability alive when hierarchy, in inverted commas, is no longer there?
It's the complete opposite.
Mm-hmm.
When everyone is involved, when everyone's voice is heard, everyone's accountable. Accountability was not an issue. Um, people were stepping up to do mundane things that people would not normally volunteer to do
Mm.
because of the energy created by the process.
Mm.
But this brings up another important aspect of network. Most top-down organizations do a terrible job with accountability
Yeah. Yes.
because you're
I agree.
accountable to a single person.
Mm.
So all I have to do is keep one person happy, and I can tell the rest of the people to be damned. That's horrible.
Yeah.
The accountability that matters most is to be accountable to your peers. And so
Mm.
in leading the business, in our office in Washington, D.C., you weren't accountable to a single supervisor.
Mm.
You were accountable to your peers, and there was peer input and peer feedback. All right. And people need to be balancing the needs of different people.
Mm.
And so I'm a firm believer in this peer accountability.
Mm. Mm.
Um, there are companies that are organized like this. Our
Yeah.
audience may be surprised to hear that there's a company that's been using this model for over 60 years.
Mm.
They've had a profit in every year of their existence. They operate in 30 countries around the world. They have 10 to 11,000 employees. They've been operating since 1958, and they've never had a boss.
Yeah. And
And
it
they keep
just proves.
growing and
Mm.
growing and growing. Now, there
Mm.
are some important metrics with respect to networks. And with the company, by the way, is Gore-Tex to make,
Mm-hmm.
it's Gore and
Yep.
Associates, the makers of Gore-Tex and other innovative products. And they've been around as long as they have because when you're designed as a network, you're designed for innovation.
I was going to say
So
that, yeah.
change can happen
Mm,
because in Gore-Tex, any group of individuals can get together and say, we're going to create a new product.
mm,
And they're on the line. Their compensation will be on the line for delivery. All right.
mm,
And so and they're aware of that. And so there are like market conditions, and people can read and learn more about Gore and how they operate. There's lots of literature about them. But this whole idea of pure accountability is what helps to drive the innovation. It's also a very effective mechanism for what we keep and what we drop.
yep.
Because if a group's working on something and it's not going to succeed, they're going to stop doing it.
Mm,
That doesn't happen in corporations.
mm,
If a senior leader is responsible for a project and it's going to fail, they keep at it, hoping that some way they'll succeed because they can't admit failure.
mm.
That's not accountability.
No.
And so, uh, and then if an idea is working, then Gore-Tex, the teams are going to expand and build off of that. And
Mm,
so it's a highly effective way for trying new things, seeing if they work. If they don't, we drop them and move on to other things. And
mm.
that becomes important in a rapidly changing world.
Yeah, and just talking about the rapidly changing world, when we were chatting before the call, you were talking about collective intelligence principles and how they're essential for AI's development.
Yes.
I would just like to touch on AI before we finish the podcast because that point was so interesting to me. Could you just extrapolate a bit on that as to why collective intelligence principles are essential for AI?
I think it's critical. I think we are going to approach a digital fork in the road.
Mm,
And how we build AI is going to determine whether it is the most draconian, tyrannical
mm,
structures we've ever seen on a scale we've never seen before, or we could literally have a leap in human intelligence that could actually evolve human intelligence. In the first one, AI is going to be an enemy,
mm,
but I think it will be an enemy of the state. In the second one, AI is going to be an accelerator, not a replacer of humanity.
mm,
And so let me get into each of those. If we get the Chinese Communist Party's picture of AI, they are looking for that to create the most draconian top-down hierarchy the world has ever seen. They already have social credit scores. The internet at some point is going to know everything about everyone in real time. That's
mm,
probably an inevitable condition. However, it doesn't have to be draconian.
mm,
If AI is a top-down hierarchy where a few people can control it, then it's going to become a tyrannical enterprise. On the other hand, if AI is built as a peer-to-peer network, decentralized, if it's built according to the Bitcoin model, blockchain,
mm,
true blockchain, in true blockchain, no single individual can command a change.
mm,
It just can't happen. It's a brilliant architecture. And if down the road we're able to do a couple of things. Number one, set up a structure that preserves your privacy. So think in the movie Avatar. When I
yeah.
saw Avatar, I thought, oh, this is a primitive model of where we need to go to. We knew everything about the avatar except their true identity. All right. And so this is what we need to do. If everything's going to know everything about everyone, keep our identity. And it's a big problem to be solved, but we need to do that
Mm,
so that we preserve inalienable individual rights, which are critical
mm,
for the sustenance of networks. Um, then the second thing we need to do is leverage collective intelligence and design the algorithms so that it will always leverage collective intelligence. And we have some warning signs here.
mm,
For a period of time, we saw the beauty and the power of collective intelligence back in the early 21st century in the presence of Google and Wikipedia. When both of those were set up, they were designed to leverage collective intelligence. Google search, the users determined the ranking of the pages.
mm,
But over time, Google began to manipulate the algorithms.
mm,
And today, Google, okay, is a top-down hierarchy. It is a censorious institution and a terrible disappointment. because they gave us our first view of the beauty of collective intelligence. They should go back to their original model and then build and amplify that. And they could be a powerful contributor to humanity
Mm.
if they stopped the censorship, if they honored all points of view, and design their algorithms so that they can't be changed to promote the bias that they do. Same thing with Wikipedia.
Mm.
Wikipedia today, a terrible disappointment,
Mm.
terrible disappointment. And it is fallen the same way because a small group of particular ideological people have grabbed the control of both of those. We have to make sure that doesn't happen. No ideology on any part of the spectrum should ever control or manipulate the algorithms. If we truly build collective intelligence structures, then we're going to experience with AI what we saw in those collective intelligence
Mm.
workshops. We can't believe how intelligent the solutions we're coming up with, and we've accomplished something none of us could have done by our own.
Mm.
But you have to honor those four conditions. And so if AI is built on that, I think what we're going to get is, for those who are familiar with the work of Daniel Kahneman and Amos
Mm.
Tversky, which was made popular by the movie Moneyball
Yeah.
and the book The Undoing Project that Michael Lewis wrote afterwards, is they identified we have two modes of thinking, system one and system two. System one is fast thinking, and it's the thinking we engage with the vast
Mm.
majority of time, all of
Mm.
us. But it's loaded with biases, and um, we have a sense of confidence
Mm.
that we have no right to hold. It's an unjustifiable sense of confidence. Slow thinking is more rational, more deliberative. We're full of doubt. We're more
Mm.
likely to focus on questions than the answers. And it is better thinking because it tends not to be biased and invites questions.
Yeah.
Okay. But it takes time.
Mm.
Uh, what AI offers us is the opportunity to do system two thinking at system one speeds. And if we had that information available to us, we could create a world where human bias is diminished,
Mm.
where, like we did in those collective intelligence workshops, we're coming up with the best of our thinking day in and day out that the broadest number of people will go along with. What if society, well, that doesn't mean that we're all going to think the same. It
No.
doesn't mean that we lose our differences of opinion.
Mm.
What it means is we have a technology that allows those differences to be constructive elements rather than destructive elements.
Mm.
Wouldn't it be great to live in a world like that?
It would be great. And that's why I asked the question about what happens when the stakes are high and we go back to being pressured and tired because we go back into system one. And I think, I'm keeping this idea of doing system two thinking at system one speed is just, for me, a great image of how we could collectively move humanity forward. Um, Rod, instead of asking you for a final call to action for our listeners, if we were to launch a challenge to our listeners now, if they committed to 90 days of building collective intelligence in their organization or their communities, what three concrete moves would you tell them to start tomorrow morning?
Okay, I think you need to change your primary metrics. Find out what your most important leading indicators are. Companies tend to measure outcome measures. And I'm not saying they're not important, and I'm not
Mm.
saying you don't connect those with compensation. I think you
Mm.
do.
Mm.
But from a management standpoint, leading indicators, you need to find out when things are off course sooner than later, especially in a rapidly changing world. It's critical for innovation.
Mm.
Okay. I think what you have to do then is you have to change the accountability structures. All right. You've got to you've got to make people accountable to more people than just their boss. And you also have to make the bosses accountable to those they lead. You need mutual accountabilities. You got to get rid of this hierarchical structure. If you got bad bosses, you want to find out fast and get rid of them. Okay. And you want people to be able to, you don't want people saying, I work for my boss, the rest of you be damned. You
Mm.
want them helping the more they help each other, then the more they're helping your customers. That
Yep.
just tends to happen.
Yep.
And finally, change how you meet. All right. Try, you know, experiment with collective intelligence. Design some session where you're getting unusual people together. Try and get the whole system in the room. If you're working on a small project, that whole system may involve 8 people, for example.
Mm.
And find, design your own procedures for how you're going to hear everybody's voice. So I think if you do those 3 things, you're on your way to building a different kind of organization. You know? And
Excellent.
if I
Thank
if I if I had if I could have a couple, I'd like to leave people with a story, because I know there are people sitting there going, "Yeah, this sounds good, but I'm not sure how practical it is."
you. Hmm.
And I want to tell a short story, and I want to lead it with a question. The question is, why don't we have major commercial airline crashes anymore? When I started my career in the 70s, we had 3 to 4 a year. And
Mm.
every time I got on a plane, I thought, I hope I'm not on one of the 3 or 4 this year. I don't worry about that anymore. Why? Is it better machines? No. They changed the management model in the cockpit because there was a crash in the United States in 1978 where the right landing gear, they weren't sure if it was locked or not. And there were 3 pilots in the cockpit, but command and control was clear. You never challenged the captain.
Mm.
And the captain got myopically focused on whether those gear were locked or not and did not pay attention to the co-pilots who were concerned about the fuel in the plane.
Mm.
But they couldn't get the message through because you don't challenge the captain. And the plane crashed because it ran out of fuel. And the NTSB team looking at it said, how could this happen? You had 2 other co-pilots who knew the danger, but they couldn't speak it. And so what happened was United Airlines was the first, and then all the airlines followed. They trained all of the pilots. You will not operate in a top-down hierarchy. You, even if you're 2 people, you're a network,
Mm.
and you are free to challenge each other. All your voices matter. And with that new discipline in place, even in cockpits of 2, operating as a network, that is why we don't have airplane crashes anymore.
Super. I'm
Yeah.
I'm going to leave our listeners with that very powerful example of what to do and how to do it. Rod, thank you very much for coming and sharing your insights, your experience, what's in your book. Where can people find out more about you and what you do?
I have a website. It's at rodcollins.net. And if they go there, it also gives them access to my Substack. And I'm writing about how this new model and AI need to come together. And I'm working on my next book is going to be along the lines of before we build artificial intelligence, we better understand human intelligence first. And
Excellent.
we have a lot to do on that.
Okay, I'll look out for that and I'll put the other links in the show notes so that people can find you easily. Thank you,
All
Rod, for a
right.
great conversation.
Thank you, Susie. Pleasure to be with you.
Likewise.